As you guys probably know by now, the OpenAI deal with Windsurf failed, which is why they're being acquired now by Google, as we see in, what? Cognition acquisition of Windsurf? This stuff never slows down, does it? I cannot get a day off in this crazy AI economy, can I? This deal is crazy. If you forgot who Cognition is, they're the makers of Devin, as they say very loudly on their homepage. Devin's the AI engineer that went viral 2 years ago because some math Olympiads decided they wanted to make their own artificial developer that would just hang out inside of your Slack and file PRs for you. After years of building, and more importantly, after LLMs got good at tool calling, the product actually seems to be in a decent place and they've been growing really fast. Now they're growing a lot faster because they just pulled in everyone who was left over at Windsurf after the Google poaching thing that happened. There's also a ton of details that I missed in my previous video, despite the fact that it was as long as it was, and I actually feel pretty bad about some of them. In particular, I didn't do justice to the new employees who kind of got screwed because their shares weren't vested. I want to do them justice by covering the things I missed. Cognition wants to do them justice, and I think did a pretty good job here. There's a lot of details to understand about the characteristics of this acquisition and how it's going to change the AI development industry that we're all in today. But my poor editor's been working overtime. We need to pay some bills. Quick word from today's sponsor, and then we'll dive right in. I want to tell you guys about a new AI coding assistant. Wait, no, don't skip. This one's really interesting. If you're fatigued by how many of these there are, you'll really like today's sponsor, Kilo Code. They're an all-in-one set of tools for everything you want to do with AI in your code editor. That code editor can be anything VS Code based, so VS Code, Cursor, Windsurf, even Tray. It has multiple different modes that all behave entirely differently. You have the orchestrator mode for planning and creating tasks and going through all of those individually. You have architect mode, which is more about like designing the solution and diagramming it out before you even start writing the code at all. You have the traditional code mode that will just take a plan and make it into the actual source code. And my personal favorite, the debug mode, which will find and fix issues in your application. That's really cool. I haven't seen anyone else do this. Okay, that all seems cool, but how expensive is it? Great question. Well, I have good news, guys. It's fully open source. So if you want to bring your own keys and just pay the API costs, you can. Or you can buy credit through them and just have the cost be the API cost. No crazy upcharges or fees. They take no commission. Really generous. On top of that, they give you $20 of free credit. And since y'all are here, they actually gave us a generous offer. We can redeem code Theo in the dashboard to get another $13.37, of course. LeetCoder. I get it. If you're tired of hopping between assistants and want one that can do everything instead, check them out today at soydev.link/kilo. We'll go over the blog post in a sec because I want to start with the video, because unlike the Google acquisition, this one feels much more human, like people are involved at the center, and I want to let them say their piece before we go into the details and what I think of all this.
Hi, I'm Scott, CEO of Cognition.
And I'm Jeff, CEO of Windsurf.
Today, we're announcing that Cognition is acquiring Windsurf. We've been building the AI software engineer Devin, and Windsurf has pioneered the agentic IDE. And we're super excited about what's possible together.
For the Windsurf team and users, this is a perfect fit. Bringing remote agents to the IDE will unlock all sorts of workflows. Imagine planning tasks in Windsurf, launching a team of Devins, and reviewing PRs from the comfort of your IDE. The opportunities to 100x your experience are endless. And of course, we're friends with Anthropic again.
We built a lot of our features at Cognition, like Deep Wiki and Ask Devin, to enhance the collaboration between humans and agents. Incorporating the first agentic IDE will help us take our vision even further.
Definitely. And believe it or not, out of all the teams in AI, the Cognition team was the one we respected the most. Working with the best engineering team in the space will be an incredible unlock for our product and our go-to-market team. But the biggest winners will be our users.
The new Cognition will move faster than ever. We want to redefine how humans and agents work together. And we can't wait to show you what we build.
Cheesy, sure, but I loved the shots being fired in this one, in particular at Anthropic. If you don't recall, Anthropic previously cut Windsurf off from direct access to their models because of the pending OpenAI acquisition. And Dario, the CEO of Anthropic, said some really stupid things about that, and I still haven't forgiven him for it. I've been considering doing a whole video dedicated to the weird vibes from Anthropic, but that has to wait because there's too much news going on lately. I'm sorry for doing yet another AI news video, but there's a lot going on here. I want to dig into the details, both of the deal and of what this means, and most importantly, what's going to happen to these employees that have been tossed around through this utter chaos. And also, how did this happen as fast as it did? The speed of this deal is crazy that this all happened over the weekend, and now Monday, we're good to go. This is what they're getting. They have the full Windsurf IDE, including full access to the latest Claude models again, To be fair, they could use the Claude models, but they had to use it through AWS Bedrock or Google Cloud. And there's no reason for that restriction because you can do everything that Anthropic was supposedly concerned that they would get all this data and use it to train. That data for training is something that is coming through with this, though, so I understand that piece and how important it is. They're also getting all of the Windsurf IP, including the trademark and the branding. Now has an actual reputation with it, especially after all of this. Not something that is worth just ignoring, as well as 82 million of existing annual recurring revenue, as well as growing businesses. Like Windsurf is doing better month over month. That's an awesome thing to have join your own company. And the user base that they're taking in has over 350 enterprise customers already, as well as hundreds of thousands of daily active users. They're also bringing the whole team along. Nobody's being left behind, and all of them are getting a payday. Like they've been very specific with the wording with what I've seen. Each employee that's part of this is getting paid, regardless of where their vesting is. That's huge. You'll also notice the wording of this world-class go-to-market piece. It's no secret that I've been kind of hard on Windsurf's whole like branding and go-to-market strategy. I found a lot of their advertising to be quite cringe, but the reason all of that's happening is they have a huge team of go-to-market people that are trying to sell. They had to have that because of the enterprise angle that they were trying to target. Remember this diagram from my previous video where on the left is like vibe coders who don't really know what they're doing, and on the right is like enterprise tools, big businesses and the things they use? The Windsurf IDE was a play on this side for sure. A little further to the middle, and I probably gave it credit, but they were trying to make something that was more accessible to beginner devs, independent devs, and people that don't work at Fortune 500 companies. And then the other side was very much plugins into ecosystems and tools that none of us probably like to use and recommend. This is a channel full of people that are tending to be in the middle. But obviously, if you are one of those JetBrains people, honestly, I'm kind of jealous because I'm sure you're making a hell of a lot of money doing it. If you're in the enterprise world, you're in the enterprise world. And one of the most notable things about this enterprise world is that you need crazy go-to-market. You need probably 2 to 3 salespeople per engineer. That's not the case at startups. That's not the case even at like middle-sized businesses. I'd be surprised if there were more than like 5 people doing go-to-market at a company like Cursor, for example. We have one person doing go-to-market for T3 Chat, and you're staring at him. Everyone else is an engineer. But like, this is the key. Marketing is not easy or cheap, especially if you built a company around engineering. Figuring out the go-to-market team, culture, sales, and all of that is a non-trivial task. And from my understanding, the Devin team and Cognition have not had much in terms of a go-to-market team just yet. It's mostly been founder-led with maybe 1 or 2 additional people helping them out. The Cognition team was relatively small. And from what I'm hearing, they more than doubled the size of the team with this acquisition. That's scary to me because I have a pretty hard rule about this. I literally was just texting a startup that I'm helping with and investing in last night. My hard rule is never, ever, ever grow your team greater than 2x per year. What I mean by this is if your company has 5 people this year, at the end of the year, it should not have more than 10 people. But isn't growth good? Why would you want to arbitrarily restrict your growth? Growth is good. If you need employees, you need employees. That's awesome. But I have a couple key things I try to emphasize with all the companies that I work with. The first is that every hire is a failure. If you're hiring, it means that you screwed something up and you are choosing to spend money indefinitely on a person and their livelihood in order to patch up that failure. The failure could be that you're growing too fast and your plan for how to scale didn't work. The failure could be you couldn't find a way to fit this into your workflow. The failure could be that you didn't have enough time to respond to this customer's email and now you realize you have to bring someone on. But if you treat every hire like a failure, you'll do a much better job hiring. I also often will say, hire for what you love, not what you hate. Because if you're hiring for things you don't like doing, you're going to be a terrible, terrible manager. So if I don't like doing sales, so I hire a salesperson to do it for me, and then they come to me telling me how excited they are about all the sales stuff that they've been doing, I'm not going to be a good place for them to work. I'm not going to be a good manager for them. I'm going to be like, oh, sure, good job. If you're an engineer and you've ever had a non-technical manager, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It sucks. So all of these rules, including the like never greater than 2x per year, I'm real strict about these things. If we think of this acquisition in these terms, you might think that it's pretty bad and that I'm not going to dig it, because in this case, they hired a ton because they just acquired this whole team. They're also focusing on what they don't like. They're specifically really focused on this go-to-market side, and they more than 2x'd in 3 days. So I should hate this, right? I don't. I want to dig into the never 2x per year a bit more because I want to make sure you guys understand why I have this rule. There's a couple pieces that I think are important when you're growing your team. The The first is, can you pay them? Let's say like at the start of 2025, you're making 10K per month as a business. Now some crazy growth happened. Your product went viral, you released something new people really like, and in 6 months, you made it to 100K a month. So in the 6-month window from January 2025 to now in July, you significantly increased your revenue. You 10x'd, and now your business is making literally $1.2 million a year. That's huge. That's awesome. And I've seen a lot of companies going through growth that looks like this. These numbers definitely aren't modeled after a company that I'm very familiar with or anything along those lines. Don't read into that too much. Let's say in January, you had 4 employees. They had 4 employees in January 2025. You were making 10K a month. Now it's July. You're making way more money, and you have 5 employees. But you are burning. Like everything is going nuts. You're spending half your day responding to support emails. Everything's on fire. Code velocity is slowing down. You know you have to grow at this point. Like it's obvious that your team of 4 that could do 10K a month versus the team of 5 doing 100K, you need more employees at this point. You know that. You've accepted that. So you go ham. If you 10x'd in 6 months, and then you presume you're going to 10x in the next 6 months, which is an easy thing to assume when you have this type of crazy growth, the rest of this is projected. So this is real, in quotes. The next step is projected. So you expect by December, you'll be at 1 mil a month because you expect to 10x again in 6 months. If you're making $1 million a month, you're making 12 mil a year, you can afford a lot of employees. Assuming each employee costs like $140K a year, again, assuming that like this covers their benefits, their hiring costs, the process of interviewing, acquisition, all of that. You assume each person costs like $140K a year. It's probably a bit lower, might be a bit higher. We'll go with that number. 12 million divided by 140,000, just the like income to employee salaries, you could theoretically have 90 employees and be profitable, assuming you have no other costs, which you almost certainly don't. But regardless, you get the idea. 5 employees at 100K is insane. Why wouldn't you just go for like 25? Maybe you go for 30 or 40 because you want to make sure you don't miss this opportunity. So you start hiring like this real early. You bring on a recruiter to hire like mad. You expand the team a bunch. But then it turns out you don't actually end up making $1 million a month. You end up doubling. Well, you grow the same amount. You grew 90K a month between January and July. So let's say you do it again. You get to 190K a month. Now, the math's going to be very different. 190,000 times 12, that's 2 mil a year. So if we're at that 2 mil a year number, 2.2 mil, and you divide that by how many employees do we say? 40. Each one can only get 55,000 out of the profit. That is not great. So if you hire assuming a growth multiple that doesn't happen, then you screwed yourself and you're burning money like mad. 40 employees at these numbers is upwards of $400,000 per month. That is not cheap. And again, that is just cost of employees. So if you're hiring based on projected growth, there's a very high chance you're going to screw yourself, which is one of the reasons I recommend companies try to hire for where they are, let themselves fall behind, and then bring on more staff because there are things burning, not because they want to get to the next step earlier. There's a common problem I'll see here where a company will see another company hiring a bunch of people and having a lot of success. If you see a company just added 100 million ARR in a year, and at the same time you see that they're hiring like a dozen people a month, it's easy to assume that these two things are linked because they are. Because their growth is crazy, they're hiring. But I see a lot of people assume the opposite and act the opposite. They're scared that their competitor just hired a ton of people, so they hire before they have the revenue. I know companies that have less revenue than T3 Chat does that have hired like 30 plus people. Neither of us are making a whole lot of money, but they now have to rely on investors to not die. We don't. Some of the numbers I've seen are absolutely nuts. As such, it's easy to get in this trap of hiring. But none of this is the biggest reason why I recommend being careful over hiring. The biggest one by far, culture. You and your team probably have some rapport with each other. You have a way you like to work. You know who the spicy guy is, who the React guy is, who the back-end lunatic is, who's good at making things happen fast, who's better at process. And you have a culture around who does what, when, where, why, and how. And just how you talk to each other and work as a team. If you hire too quickly, you don't have the time to absorb the culture changes. Let's say you have this group of 4 employees and you have this 5th guy and you have to squeeze them in somewhere. This box obviously has to grow. If this box is your team's culture or like how you act or work together or whatnot, It has to grow in some way in order to fit this. And that process is uncomfortable. It takes a bit to make this work. If you've ever been a new employee, you know what I'm talking about. It never feels quite right initially. And if you've ever hired a new employee, you know the same thing. It never feels quite right that this other person's suddenly in the room or in the Slack or whatever else. But at the same time, the amount that this grows and shifts is different. If I was to put this more rudely, imagine that you're like microdosing poison. Every time you let someone new into the team, you have to make sure you have the capability to handle the shift, both to integrate them into the team and to integrate the team into them to an extent. It's a two-way thing. The person's going to have to change a bit to fit the team well, and the team's going to have to change a bit to fit the person well. And the bigger the team is, the easier it is to absorb an individual. So if this team wasn't 4 people, it was 40 people, this new one coming in is a smaller drop in the bucket and has less impact on the dynamics of it. So what happens if instead of sending in 1 person, you send in 10 or 6 or whatever else? Now, each of these people coming in with their own way of building, thinking, doing, now has to fit it into this box. The box will break in the process. The way your team works will crumble under the weight of all these new people joining, especially if they each bring their own culture with them, which they do. If this guy came from Facebook, if this guy came from Google, if this guy came from a failed startup, if this guy came from his own startup, all of those cultures are different from yours. And if you want to establish a good team that people like working with and understand what they're responsible for, you need to handle this accordingly. There is a time where this can be different, though. If all of these people come from the same culture and box, if this is what you're acquiring, if you're bringing in a different box with a different culture, now the way that these merge can behave entirely differently because you aren't trying to make one person fit into another box. You're not trying to make 10 people with different things fit together. You just have to see how these two things differ and work together to make it come together. I've seen a lot of companies that are trying to hire a sub team to build a specific product or try to do something new with the business. I'm even considering this myself for making a crazy image gen product within T3 Chat. If we were to hire 4 people and try to force them into a team, that wouldn't work. But if you can acquire an existing team that's already built this report where everybody already knows how to communicate with each other, this gets a lot easier. Because another way of thinking of this isn't as boxes, it's as connections between these people. All of the people in this diagram are already connected with each other. If you're a 4-person team, everyone talks to each other, everyone understands each other, everybody knows who to chat with, and nobody's scared to chat with the other person. So if you fit in a 5th person, everyone has to build a rapport with them, and they have to build a rapport with everybody. But if you squeeze in a new team, each of them only needs to necessarily build rapport with the whole new team, because once they know someone in that team or the team itself, they can rely on whoever their contact is to be their point of reference. Or if they even have just one person here, if, let's say person 2 at this company becomes the head of marketing. So 2 is now GTM lead. They are the point of contact for this new go-to-market team that we just hired. So if you have this go-to-market team, you have this go-to-market lead, everyone else in the original culture can hit up that person to get a hold of that team to figure out what's going on. And of course, they can each still build individual rapport with whoever else they want to, and that will still happen over time. But the cultural breakdown tends to happen when there isn't a clear path for people to, frankly, understand each other. You already understand the people in this box, and you're risking losing the box and the people, and most importantly, those connections when you expand too fast. This is a weirdly good way to keep that from happening. I often tell companies and founders that they shouldn't be trying to acquire a bunch of people to assemble a team. They should try to find one really good person and figure out who they've already worked with, who they've built rapport with, and maybe if their whole team wants to leave. And if you find someone on a good team that's kind of burnt, that's a great thing to pull in. Because if you can hire 5 people that already know how to work together, you get to skip all of this shit. So if Cognition didn't have much of a go-to-market team yet, which as far as I know, they basically didn't at all, and they knew they needed this if they want to keep pushing it to enterprises, and the go-to-market team at Windsurf was legit because of the diagram I showed earlier, they were working really hard on this for a long time. And remember what we talked about with the acquisition? Google gets this side and Windsurf is left with this side? This makes all the sense in the world, because if Cognition is similar to Cursor where they live in the middle and they want to go further and further out to the enterprises, what they need is a sales team. What Codium was left with is a sales team, as well as a handful of engineers that help maintain things, in particular for the plugins and that world. And now all of that is part of Cognition. It makes a ton of sense. But there are other things that are now part of Cognition too. So here's what Cognition actually gets. Obviously, they get the Windsurf IP, but to be clear, so does Google. Part of Google's purchase of that chunk of the Windsurf team and the original founders is that they also get a license to use Windsurf's technology. Not their brand, though. So the IP, as in the implementation details, the actual work they put into building the editor, that is now effectively owned by two companies that can both do whatever they want, Cognition and Google. However, the trademark belongs to Cognition. So Google can't use the name Windsurf for things, as far as I understand from the deal. Cognition can. One other really important piece, and this one I don't think anyone else has really covered, training data. As far as I have seen, since Google didn't acquire Windsurf, they just got the team, any data that existed at Windsurf is not stuff that Google gets. They just get the implementation details, like the source code, effectively. They don't get all of the historical stuff that Windsurf users have done if they have the little checkbox on for letting them keep track of that data. And as I've been saying forever now, this data is more and more important every single day. If you have a bunch of examples of users asking the agent to make a code change, it not going quite right, and then they went and changed the files themselves, you now have incredible feedback on what the user's intention was and what the actual code was. If you can link those together, throw it into the training pot, what comes out? Better inference, better agents, better code gen. Makes a ton of sense for something like Devin that doesn't want you to have to go into the editor and change the code yourself. If Devin was to generate a PR that isn't good, you throw it away and go rewrite it yourself. Devin doesn't have the data they need to know what you did different from what they did. Windsurf does, because if Windsurf fails when you're trying to generate some code, you go change the code. And now we've linked the prompt, the code that Windsurf gave you, and the code you actually wrote. That is essential data. And having that will be huge for Cognition, as well as to continue getting this data over time. And of course, there is the team. It's my understanding that Windsurf actually had a bigger GTM team than Eng team, and Cognition was the opposite, where they had a ton of Eng and basically no GTM at all. So this makes a ton of sense. They will merge together, where the go-to-market is largely led by this Windsurf team coming in, and the Eng team will be folded into the Cognition Devin team, as well as continuing to build and maintain the IDE, and most importantly, integrate background agents into the IDE. As a big fan of Cursor, which yes, I'm an investor, I know, bias is bias, account for it how you choose to. We have background agents now, where I can ask a background agent to go do a thing, and it will spin up a cloud instance for this to run in that is separate from what I'm doing in my editor right now. That's really cool. The idea of when coming up with a task or work, I can choose, do I want this on my machine right now so I can change it, or do I want a PR later that I can review? The idea of having that level of granularity in the editor instead of choosing at the time where you start working on the task is great. Because right now the solution is you open up your phone, you go to Slack, and you at Devin to go do the thing. If that's just part of your editor experience, that seems really promising. I haven't used it much in Cursor yet. I do plan to start using it more soon, but I see the vision. I do see a lot of potential with what these guys are doing. And obviously, as I was just saying, they get the IDE. The whole Windsurf IDE experience is now part of Cognition. They get to keep maintaining it, integrating it, building on top of it, doing whatever they want to, and all of the revenue alongside that as well. So this is what Cognition gets. What does Windsurf get? And to be clear, when I say Windsurf here, what I mean is who's left. Since the founders left and they assigned the CTO and VP roles to other people at the company, they're not Windsurf anymore. The people who left aren't Windsurf anymore. The people who stayed at Windsurf are Windsurf. And as they very excitedly said, the company is now owned by employees. This is one of the two things I didn't read enough into in my previous video, and I absolutely should have, because this also implies that the investors are out. And that is my understanding now as well, that any investor that was part of the Windsurf craziness left as part of this transition. In the payout that I talked about, where the company would be folded in and they would pay dividends out to all the holders, it now sounds more like those holders who were paid no longer are part of the table. And the remaining employees now make up 100% of what things were before. So I don't think any investors got anything out of this. I do actually believe that the whole company was owned by the employees. But there are catches to that. I hate that I feel like I have to give an overview of how stock vesting works, but I know enough people get confused by it that I'm scared to not. If you join a company, your offer will probably look something like this. So you get 150K of raw salary, like cash to your bank. Obviously, you have to pay taxes and whatnot too. And then stock, you'll get 100K over 4 years. So that's 25K a year. So that just gets added in every month, right? Nope. The way that most stock grants work is they have a cliff. The reason they do that is because if you join a company and get fired 3 months in, you shouldn't have equity for that business. It's a huge de-risk for the business and also an incentive for retention. It gives you a reason to stay, because if you leave before you hit that 1 year mark, you don't get anything. On one hand, this sucks because employees that get fired or are forced in a situation like what happened here get screwed. But on the other hand, I have had really bad employees in the past that like should not have equity, and making sure you fire them quickly and you get them off your table immediately is valuable. So I could see it from both sides, and there is arguments in every direction. There is no argument for what happened to Windsurf employees that joined somewhat recently. Windsurf had a big hiring spree last year. When they announced the Windsurf editor, they went hard. They ramped up go-to-market even more. They hired a bunch of engineers, and they went hard because they wanted to catch up to Cursor. So there was a bunch of employees that came in around then, and that was 10 to 11 months ago. This means there's a lot of employees that haven't started getting equity yet. And that's a big deal because if you've been working at the company with this offer and you've been there for 11 months, so in 11 months, you've gotten $137,000 roughly, and you've gotten $0 of equity. And then when 12 months hits and you hit the cliff for your equity, you'll now be at $150K because that's your salary. You will have made that in the year, but you'll also immediately get the $25K of equity. From that point forward, some companies will vest every month, so now you get a little chunk of equity every month. Other companies will do it in chunks of 3 months. Some will do it 6 months. Some will still do it yearly, which I hate. But you've unlocked the ability to get equity once you hit that 1 year cliff. That's why it's called a cliff, because you get nothing until this wall hits, and then you get a small amount every month, or whatever the rate of vesting is. So now imagine you had 25K of equity, but the company 10x'd in this time. That should have been 250K of equity then. And to be clear, the equity isn't granted in dollar value, it's granted in the actual stock units. So if it's 100K of equity and the company's worth 10 mil at the time, that's 1% of the company. Chances are it's not going to be anywhere near that. It's probably going to be like 100 mil. Early companies don't get percentages, they get point percentages. Like first 5 people usually are going to be in the like 0.3% to the 1% range, which doesn't sound like much until you realize 1% of 100 billion is a million. 1% of 2.4 billion is 24 million. So getting 1% of something like this is actually an absurd amount of money. Once you get further into the stages, once you're employee 40 or onwards, measuring in percent barely even matters because what are you going to do knowing you have 0.04%? How does this information benefit your life? When I was at Amazon, I probably had 0.00005% of Amazon at best, probably less actually. The percentages stop mattering once they get small enough. That's why I'm trying to not talk in them. But the percentages do matter because they represent shares. So if you have 100K of equity on top of 100 mil valuation, that's 0.1% in shares. So if the company has, we'll say the company has 100 million shares, so it's a really clean $1 is 1 share. If you're getting 100K of equity, that means you're getting 100K shares. Now let's say in this time, the company's value 10x'd. They're now worth $1 billion. Your 100K shares are no longer worth 100K, they're now worth $1 million. Now let's say the company is selling for $2.4 billion. Your 100K shares are now worth $2.4 million. Except for the fact that if it happened here, you have none of that. So there were people that were off by like days, and these people had equity that might have been worth in the millions of dollars, and they got zero for it. Literally nothing. That is horrifying. That is disgusting. That is terrible. And it horrifies me that I had forgotten to mention this part because I knew Windsurf had hired a whole bunch last year. I just didn't even think about the issue of them not having their equity. So there are people who got hired within weeks of each other where one of them would get a big payday and the other got jack fucking shit. That sucks. There are a ton of employees that got screwed as a result of this deal. And from what I have heard, there's a good bit of resentment that is being built up at Windsurf because of this. The existing employees are mad, even the ones who did get paid, because they have coworkers and friends and these people they care about around them that for no fault of their own got jack fucking shit as part of this deal. I'm genuinely so thankful that I can say Cognition got this part right. 100% of Windsurf employees will participate financially in this deal. 100% of Windsurf employees will have vesting cliffs waived for their work to date. So if they were on a cliff line, they no longer are. They have the cliff hit. They get the 25% of their grant. But more importantly, and this is such a baller move, 100% of Windsurf employees will receive fully accelerated vesting for their work to date. That means most, or if not all of that equity that was hanging out for later, you're either getting it now or it's accelerated, so you're getting it way sooner. That is huge, huge. If I understand this all correctly, these employees are getting a big pile of cash ASAP from the vesting cliff, and potentially they're getting equity in Cognition because of this. That's a huge win for the team. Remember the thing I was talking about earlier with the culture merge? Do you know how awkward the merge would be if people in this bucket didn't get much out of it? If these guys got screwed, but a couple people, maybe like 5 because they were early, they got a big payday, but everyone else here didn't? That would build so much resentment, and the relationship between these parts would make that cultural merge just horrible. Instead, these people are all on top of the world, hopefully at least. I haven't talked to enough of them to be sure, but from the inside info I've gathered, these guys seem very happy with the way this all went down. If that is the case, which I have every reason to believe it is, we now have an awesome way for these cultures to merge because everyone is excited. Cognition doesn't have to build a huge go-to-market team. They have a group of people that they felt bad for. They saw this happen. And if you work at an early stage company or you founded one yourself, it's easy to look at what happened to these early employees and genuinely feel sick. Like, I almost went and took down my video and published an amendment to it because of how frustrated I was at myself for not bringing up these early stage people and how screwed they got. For that, I am genuinely sorry. I was so focused on the details of the deal and the details of the people leaving that I missed this piece. And this piece was really, really important, and I fucked it up. And I am so thankful for Cognition for making it right. I really shouldn't show this. I hate doing this. I am violating some of my integrity by doing this, but I am really frustrated with the original founder of Windsurf. He's said some weird stuff. I tried hitting him up for information. He responded initially, and then when I hit him up saying I was disappointed, he never responded. I want you guys to understand I go really out of my way to get these things resolved behind the scenes before I bring up the drama. When I saw the unvested employees didn't get anything, I was so deeply frustrated and disappointed and horrified and so many other things. Like, it kept me up that night knowing that these people had uprooted their lives, given up well-paying jobs to take the risk on a startup like Windsurf, and the reward for that was fucking nothing. It made me feel horrible. So I hit him up and asked, please tell me shit isn't true, entirely off the record, founder to founder, make this right. Take a big chunk out of your personal payout and allocate it to anyone who is near vesting. You can make it work. Do the right thing here, man. Never got a reply. He was replying pretty actively before then, so I'm almost certain he saw it. That's why I'm choosing to show it here. If he had replied, I would have maintained the off the record there, but this is my message, not his. I sent it to him. He never replied. I am choosing to show you guys because I want you to understand how deep my resentment and disappointment is right now. Ugh. He could have made something really good here and last second screwed over a ton of people. And with the amount of money he personally got out of the deal, it would not have been that hard to have paid a bunch of the existing employees to make this smoother. I am very disappointed in how he handled this. So if you worked at Windsurf when this all went down, you now probably have a deep disdain for the founder and the people alongside him who left for Google. And now you have crazy loyalty to Cognition for coming in and doing this huge baller thing that entirely changes the trajectory and shape of their business. Like, Cognition just spent a ton of their own equity and money and time and the things that they raised in order to make this happen. They might even have to go do another fundraise in order to make ends meet to make an acquisition like this financially viable. That all said, if Cognition had hit me up as an early investor in their company and said, hey, we see an incredible opportunity for us here to accelerate our plan for go-to-market, to get real enterprise customers immediately, and to take Cursor on more directly, we just need to raise a little bit more money in order to be able to afford this, I would have written a check so fast my head would have spun. Like, that's such an obvious thing to invest in. This just kind of works for all of the people involved on this side now. Cognition gets to skip a bunch of hard steps, and instead of hiring a bunch of people that bring their own cultures, hire a team of people that already has an established culture and integrate the two together to make your sales pipeline work. Instead of having to build their own IDE from scratch, they acquired second place so they can immediately enter the market competing with Cursor directly. And most importantly, they have a highly motivated, spiteful team ready to go. One of the best drivers for success in spaces like this is spite. I hate that this is real, but it's absolutely real. Some of the most successful businesses I've seen are because people felt screwed and wanted to fix that. One of the best examples of this is Rippling. Rippling is a payroll service, so they manage everything from like my tax compliance and payroll, HR process, and even provisioning machines for my team if I start buying them laptops directly with a company image. It's all the stuff that you would normally have to like hire a team for and use these crappy services for. Rippling was founded by Parker Conrad, who previously had made a company named Zenefits. Zenefits was an attempt to do similar, but in particular focused on healthcare and benefits for employees so that you could make it easier to be compliant with healthcare laws with your employees. I could rant literally forever about getting healthcare for your employees. It's radicalized me to be pro Medicare for all simply because it's so easy to screw it up and it's basically impossible to get right. Getting healthcare for your employees sucks 100 times harder than it possibly reasonably should. Even though I was willing to spend the money, I was excited to spend the money to get my team covered, doing it right is so beyond words annoying. Zenefits was one of the first attempts to do that. Zenefits is now part of TriNet because they failed entirely. The reason they failed was an attempt to grow. Parker was the founder and the CEO, and they wanted to be a more legitimate business when they were growing, so they brought on an experienced business guy. Who worked at PayPal really high up. An experienced business guy you might actually know the name of. David Sachs. David Sachs was brought into the board and as COO in order to try and fix the compliance issues the business had, because again, doing this is hard, even and especially as a company doing it. Some of the things they had done, in particular this browser extension to get around the bullshit training requirement stuff that California has, were causing problems for the company, and David convinced the board to kick out Parker. And then the business collapsed almost immediately afterwards. Parker is so spiteful about this, as he should be. He still gets in shit with David Sachs on Twitter like monthly over this. He feels so deeply wronged by what David did to him and his company that he built Rippling out of spite. He built this business to fight because he was angry, and the result is they crushed all of the competition. Rippling is by far the lead in this space now. It's kind of crazy how quickly they showed up and how quickly they took over. Man, I wish I was an investor in Rippling, but they started just before I got into YC. And obviously we are using Rippling for our payroll because they're awesome to work with. So why am I bringing all of that up? How spiteful do you think the Windsurf team is? How deeply motivated do you think they are now to win? To beat Google, to be better at Windsurf than the Windsurf founder is, to do the things that they think Google is going to try and do with that team 10 times better, 5 times faster, and way faster getting to market with it all. It's rare that a company gets the opportunity to buy a rocket ship, but there's a very good chance that's what just happened to Cognition. I have heard them describing it as an opportunity from heaven, and I see what they're seeing now that I've looked into the details more. It makes a ton of sense for them to get the things they were missing, get a culture that's already established with a team that's highly motivated and spiteful towards this other group, be their number one ally, the people who believed in them to make it happen, and now they get to do this ride together. The only other piece I haven't really talked about here is the impact on the startup market. There's an implicit pact that you kind of make with your early hires and also your investors when you start a company. There is the explicit one, which is your fiduciary duty. You are legally required to do what you believe is in the best interest of your business for it and all of its shareholders. Just as an example of what I mean here, if I have a company that's doing pretty well, but I have a competitor that I know has a really good shot at beating us, if I was to make a deal with them that's like, okay, I'm going to invest a bunch of money in your company, I'm going to get a bunch of equity in your company, and then I'm going to shut mine down, knowing that it's going to make your value go up a whole bunch. That would be very, very illegal. It's almost insider trading-y to do stuff like that, but it's not just insider trading, it's a failure of your fiduciary duty. Or if you were to invest in that company and you wanted them to acquire yours because you know that will boost their value, or you want to join them as an employee at the company, you could have them acquire your company for 1 cent on the condition that they pay you $10 million as part of it. That's illegal. That should not be possible. Sadly, there are deals like this that happen. They usually happen with better numbers for everyone involved, but it's sketchy, and it means that investors kind of get screwed. And investors have a lot of money. They don't like being screwed. They are also very, very spiteful. But there's also the agreement that you have with your employees. The big one is that you go down with the ship. If this company isn't going to make it, you end it with them and do everything you can to support them, or you fail with them. You don't leave before they do. The idea of a founder leaving their team behind horrifies me. Jake from Railway had a good comment on this. I think the shell hires, the Scale, Windsurf, etc. deals are some of the worst things to happen to startups. The point of a startup is there's assurance of binded fate. These shell hire things undo the binding. As a founder, it's your job to get everyone home, full stop. This opens the door for shafting people. Any leader who doesn't take care of their team is a traitor to the cause. Full stop, point fin. Yep, it's known, but bears stating crystal. Founders talk. Everyone talks about this. Your reputation directly affects your ability to stay in winning circles. Great people have very high standards for those that they run with. Huge deal. The likelihood that any of the people involved on the original Windsurf founding team leaving side can get deals in the future is near zero. This has made me skeptical of talks that I was in with Google. This is changing my relationship with businesses and brands because I have so much resentment for how they treated these earlier employees and how they treated these unvested employees in particular. The way that they were betrayed is really, really bad. And I would understand if there are potential early stage employees that are no longer interested in startups. It's a risk joining a startup. If you can make $400K a year with benefits at a company like Google that'll be there in 20 years, or you can make $100K a year at a startup with a chance of them being worth billions of dollars someday, that sucks. Like, obviously, you're going to go with the big company. I even did this. My comp was near $500K a year total across stock and my actual salary when I was at Twitch because it was part of Amazon. And quitting that to make a startup was sketchy and scary as shit. I went from making a lot of money to none. And obviously, we're doing pretty well now. I took the risk, I took the gamble, and it worked out for me. But engineers that are leaving to join a startup have to do this math. There's a thing that sucks that we all know and understand that ended up being pretty beneficial to me. And I feel selfish even putting it that way and showing this, but it's reality. Before and during the early days of COVID, engineering salaries had gotten absurdly high. Like, we're talking 500 to 600K for like senior-ish engineers. That was nuts. And it made it really hard for startups to get good engineers because the good engineers could go make a killing at these big companies. Due to the recent collapse in the number of available jobs, the amount of companies doing layoffs, shrinking their team size, downsizing, and more, salaries are going down, number of opportunities are going down, and most importantly, the safety that's represented by these big companies no longer is real. You went to Google because you would expect to be there for 10 years and it's fine. Now you might get laid off next week. You don't know. You actually have somewhat less certainty about the role and if it will exist or not at a big company than you do at a startup now. The balance of how safe a startup bet is versus a big company has been shifted significantly due to the layoff culture. And I know way fewer startups doing these types of layoffs than I know big companies. I know way more engineers that got laid off by a big company than worked at a startup that failed. The ratio change here is nuts. And it was a really good thing for me, both as a founder hiring these people, but also for these new businesses that I've invested in, that I'm friends with, that I see building and trying to succeed. Their ability to get good talent went up a ton as a result of the downsizing and the layoffs. And that was exciting as hell. That now feels less worth it. Here's how I think of it. Green is your guaranteed return, your salary. Blue is your potential return. If the company does really well, what does your extra return look like, your equity and whatnot? And red is the risk profile. Notice that I made the blue faded because I want you to know, like, this isn't real. This is real. This also should be faded because it's the risk profile. So you have your guaranteed comp, your potential upside, and the risk. Big company, that makes sense. You're guaranteed a lot of money. You might make more if the company does really well, but like realistically, a company like Apple isn't going to 10x. They're going to maybe 2x, maybe. Same with Google, Microsoft, and others. Your likelihood of more than doubling is relatively low. With a small startup, you're giving up your base salary. It's probably going to be half-ish what you could get at a bigger company. Your potential upside is absurd, like not even renderable in this chart, but your risk also goes up a ton because if the company fails, you get jack shit and you have to go job hunt again. This is what you're deciding on when you pick between a big company and a small startup. You have the risk, the potential upside, and the guaranteed upside. And this is a profile that makes a lot of sense for most people. The majority of people should have normal jobs at big companies. Sadly, this has started to change. Big companies post layoffs, as in like the layoff culture we're in today, your base salary has gone down a little bit. Also, your equity's gone up because if they're laying off, every time they do layoffs, they bump 10%. So your potential upside's gone up, your salary's gone down. But now your risk profile is very close to what you were dealing with at the small startup. Between big company before and small startup, most people should pick this. And if you pick the small startup instead, you might be a gambling addict, or you might just be really excited about the startup you picked. Regardless, the point I'm trying to make here is this was a bad choice. This was a good choice. But when it looks like this, the choice gets a lot harder to make. And that's what I really want to focus on here is like the small startup bet had a high risk profile, but now big companies do too. The reason I'm bringing all of this up right now is a really painful thing that happens due to the fact that Windsurf screwed so many employees. They just increased the risk profile on the startup because even if the company is successful, there's a chance you get screwed. Previously, company succeeds, you succeed, company fails, you get a new job. Now there's this new case of company succeeds and you get shafted still. What the fuck? Now the benefit that we as startups had over the changes to big companies, it's being zeroed out by one greedy company. I could even justify the conspiracy that Google intentionally did this, not just because they wanted to get the company for cheaper, but they want to scare great employees from doing startups. Now that there's less reason for a potential employee to go to a startup, they're more likely to stay at Google. I'm not saying this is a real conspiracy. I would be surprised if this was an actual internal conversation they had at Google, but it's probably a subconscious part of their decision-making process. Making it so that there's less reason to work at a startup is absolutely within the interests of Google. And they succeeded. This sucks. This makes joining a startup way scarier. And it also makes it scarier as an investor, because now when I invest, there's less confidence the company can raise money. And more importantly, there's less confidence that I will get paid out at the end, because we still don't know the actual numbers for how much of the 2.4 bill went to investors versus the team that left. We don't have any of the information. And if you're an investor that wasn't an investor in Windsurf, you also probably don't have the information. So now you're a bit scared, because if you invest in a company that does really, really well, you double down on the company in their next round. And then a year later, the team that you invested in gets pulled to another company and you get paid pennies for what you threw in. That sucks. That just flat out sucks. Ugh. Yeah. Wanted to make sure we covered this piece because I think about it a lot, and I'm scared as shit that what just happened is going to change how we have to hire at startups, and is going to change the investor willingness to bet on these startups. The potential risk to the entire startup world and economy is very real from something like this, and I'm genuinely a bit scared. That all said, the amount of shame that the original Windsurf founders are being forced to feel right now, the amount of people like Jake, like me, like all these other investors, advisors, founders, and employees that are giving them shit, and also Cognition, bless them for jumping in the way they did here. The fact that Cognition came in and did this is a huge faith builder for anyone looking to join a startup. As much as this is a good play for them and they lucked out having something like this fall into their hands, it's also a bro move on their part for the entire startup world. Cognition is kind of betting on startups succeeding. And if startups are going to be hiring more people and growing really fast, Cognition wants them using their tools. If there are less startups, Cognition makes less money. They know that. That's how they built their business. So the worst case here, if everything with the Windsurf deal fails, at least they pay the people, there's less fear for a potential employee joining a startup than there was before Cognition bought Windsurf. So as a hedging of the bets to just make it easier for other startups to find success, I think this play makes a ton of sense. So once again, huge shout out to Cognition for jumping in and doing the best possible thing I could think of here. Like if you had asked me like napkin math, what's the best play anyone could do to unfuck this? It would have been for the original founders to pay off the team and like give them the money they deserve. Barring that possibility, it would have been Google doing it in order to keep themselves from getting stewed. Barring that possibility, I would have theorized like maybe some investors can get together and put together a pot to make sure they get paid out somewhat more fairly. I never would have thought of this. I never would have thought of a smaller startup acquiring what was left of Windsurf. But now that I've seen it, now that I've read it, now that I understand it, it all makes a ton of sense. One last tiny detail that I want to emphasize. Let's go back to this diagram. Remember when I said if they were worth like theoretically 1.5 bill, 20% investors, 5% employee pool, so employees are all split into that, 75% is the founders? They said when this transition happened, the whole thing became employee owned. So if this deal was that they would pay 2.4 bill out to these guys, and now what's left is 100 mil, we have to account for something. Previously, I drew this diagram with this getting bigger, but those were the founders. They're gone. And it's also our current understanding that this 20% is also gone. The 5%, which is the employee pool, it's the stock that was allocated to all of the employees. And to be clear, we don't know it's 5%. This is just based on like my understanding of startups and early stage companies and what these pools usually look like. It's 3 to 5% for the employees. That 5% is no longer 5. It's now 100%. They're fully employee owned. So if you had one of those 5%, so you had one of 5, you had 1% before, you now have 20%. That's a huge shift. You went from having 1% of this company theoretically worth 1.5 bill to 20% of this company theoretically worth 100 mil. But that was all theoretical value. Still is. But now they're acquired. If you were acquired before, you would have had your 1% convert. Now as a partial owner, especially post equity vesting and acceleration, as a significant partial owner of what was left of Windsurf, you got a much better deal here. There's a decent chance due to the weird nature of this whole path that the employees going from 5% to 100% ownership, they might have done even better than they would have with the previous deal. I obviously don't know. I tried my best to get real numbers and couldn't, and I understand why. These are all things that have to be kept under wraps. But man, huge shout out to Cognition for doing the right thing here. This is a surprisingly good ending to an utterly chaotic set of circumstances. I know my best to cover it last time, but if I hadn't missed this detail about the early employees, the video's tone would have been very different. I still think the educational value of the video is good, so I'll be leaving it up, but I'll absolutely be leaving something in it, pointing people here, because this one breaks down the important details and how many people were screwed and how, most importantly, it has been fixed since then. Thank you to the new Windsurf team that's now part of Cognition for not being mad at me for screwing it up, but actually just reaching out and helping me get it right. I wanted to be sure to do this correct, and I never once felt like they were upset with me for what I did. They just wanted me to have the opportunity to understand. They never asked me to do something different. They never told me to change my coverage. They just hit me up because they felt upset, not about my coverage, but about what happened. And through this, not only have I managed to correct the record, I've also made some awesome friends too. So thank you to everybody who's part of Windsurf and Cognition, and everyone else who has given me the information I needed to cover this. I appreciate all of you immensely. And to Varun, the original founder of Windsurf, what the actual fuck, man? You just risked an entire industry over your weird deal. You could have given up like 10% of the absurd windfall of cash you just got and prevented all of this bullshit from happening. I hold you and Google accountable for your bullshit, and you are so lucky Cognition came in to clean up your mess. This is your fault. You should feel shame for it. And I hope you take the time to reflect while you're sitting in your billions of dollars about the fuckery you put this industry through and you put these people through who gave up their jobs and gave up parts of their lives to work with you on a thing they believed in. You fucked up bad. You should feel bad for it. And I hope you hear this and recognize what you've done. Sorry, I'm a little salty. The thought of doing this as a founder is horrifying to me. I literally, when this happened, I went to Mark, my co-founder, and said, if I ever do anything like this to you, sue the fuck out of me. And I stand behind that. No founder should put their team through something like this. I'm thankful it ended well, and I'm sorry for not getting these details right the first time. This is a mess. Hopefully the mess is over, but I have a bad feeling that as soon as I hit end record, things are going to ramp back up again. So fingers crossed for me and my team, that doesn't happen this time. Let me know what you guys think about this utter fucking chaos. And until next time, peace, nerds.